today we're going over a mix of Module 4 and 5. Module 4, I'm still hanging on a couple of aspects from Module 4 just because a couple of you guys are still on your translation phase, and I just want to have like a pinpoint on the fact that we are not completely and fully done with Module 4. We are still trying to perfect it as we are going to move forward. And at the start of the Module 5, it's just basically introducing you to a software, systematic research software called Covidence, which we're going to get to it in a bit, and we're going to learn more about it. But up until now, we've worked on developing your research question, identifying concepts, and creating your search strategies, your protocol, and looking for correct databases. And as we talked about, I'm just going to switch back to the translation step on the strategies and the steps I would personally take when I am looking for databases, how you're supposed to then organize those studies and import them to Covidence, and how to perform screening in a systematic and reproducible way. And at the end of the day, just remember that Covidence is just one of those many tools that is just making the research process way faster and way easier, and it is becoming very essential because even though, despite of having a very strong question, the screening phase can get a little bit tedious at times, but with the help of such tools like Covidence, it'll just makes everything very much consistent and more transparent and very much reproducible. All right. One common misconception is that a search strategy overall can simply be copied and pasted in every database. Unfortunately, that's not how literature searching works. Every database uses its own syntax, its own search operator, its own subject heading and field tags. For example, with Medline, as you should be knowing about this by now, we call those subject headings, those controlled vocabularies, mesh terms, while databases like Web of Science don't have a controlled vocabulary. So the goal here is not to change your research question ultimately, but is to translate to your search strategy while preserving the same concept. And just think of it like translating a sentence or like a conversation into another language. The wording is technically changing, but the meaning behind it is technically staying the same. And after creating your primary search strategy in Medline, your next responsibility is translating that into at least 2 additional databases. So once you got the Medline out of the way, the first step is to select the databases that matches your topic of area. For example, if you are discovering or investigating the topic in health and biomedical sciences, you should think of an accumulation of Medline and Baseline Web of Science. With psychology and mental health topic, you should consider Medline, PsycInfo, and Scopus. And nursing and allied health topic would obviously ask you to have Medline and CINAHL and Web of Science at the end of the day, okay? And when you get to the second step, it's just pretty much knowing how the terminologies work in the other additional databases that you selected. So you have to learn about data-specific formatting that technically changes according to the database, like the field tags or sometimes keywords, but it's not the fact that you have to always change your keyword concepts. And as you might be recalling, I mentioned that mesh terms usually stays the same if any database technically operates on controlled vocabulary. And your keywords, more or less, I can assure you that you can pretty much use the same thing, but it's just a matter of the techniques and syntax and search techniques that you might be applying differently. For example, with PubMed and Medline, which is basically the same database, instead of using the lowercase ti, which stands for title, you will just use ti uppercase in Web of Science. And as I said, the concepts stay the same, but the database format changes. And after this, you will obviously should search your new database, search your new search technically in your new database, and after translating, you would run the search. You should always consider asking questions such as if I run into error, I have to fix it, if my results are relevant, or if there are too many or too few results, and the way that I would usually verify the reproducibility of the search that I put out in my two other databases is to check over the first 10 to 20 article to see if it matches the research question that I have, or if it is related to my topic at all. That's one thing, that is something that I would mentally, personally do. So this is a good technique to keep in mind. And then you will, as I've said before, over and over and over again, which is like one of those steps that can be overlooked by beginners, but you must document every single thing that you would do along the way in your search strategy and along the way in your whole learning experience in a research field. Just the way that you would have to technically have a written version of your final paper. Every single person who has done proper research before, they would always encourage you to have a list of the databases that you use, the platforms, or any date even that you might have ran that search. Or you, at the end of the day, your final search, you have to always include all of these information, the number of results that you might have possibly retrieved, and obviously the amount of files and the amount of papers that you're going to import later on. You should always save those. And one quick note that I want to make here is the fact that Covidence only accepts like certain formatting. So once you get to that stage, which I'm going to show you in a bit, when you get to that stage that it asks you to technically export the papers that you found, you should always like either save it in Excel or EndNote, RIS, or CSV. Okay. And this is again a review of the table that we had with the name of the databases, which is listed here, the area of focus, and the field ultimately that they would be focusing on when you would target a specific database. It's there for your reference. So now let's look at an example. Suppose we created like a search string for a disease called lupus using mesh terms and its key term. I actually didn't include the mesh terms over this line, but it's okay. The database that we are technically translating this specific key term search into is called Web of Science. And as I mentioned before, Web of Science doesn't have any control vocabulary, so you might as well just consider removing your mesh terms, and you don't have to like even consider adding it when you are running your search in Web of Science. And from there, once you get to Web of Science, the good thing that I like about this field, about this database, is that the title, the field of studies that you want the database to target your search is pretty much listed out for you. It has like a drop-down menu, so you get to pick like the field that you want the database to target. So, for example, with a couple of searches that we did, one of the many places technically that we usually use a tag for it is titles, abstract, and keyword headings, which you can obviously choose any of those fields when you get to Web of Science. Hopefully I have a picture of all of these here. Okay. This is how Web of Science on a good day would look like. Again, you can access Web of Science through your institution. And once you get to Web of Science, there's like a little tiny option here called Advanced Search. So you just click that, and you will get to this stage that you can technically add rows, and you can add date ranges, and this is the drop-down menus that I was talking about. So once you technically add your search, you'll get to pick a field among all of the options that Web of Science technically suggests over here. So I'm pretty sure it has titles, authors, references, abstract, a lot of things, honestly. And one thing that I would like to do is to always combine all of my searches one in a round with title, abstract, and keyword with the or, and then I will start adding on top of these um, according to the next concept that I have to combine with my previous concept. And yeah, that is pretty much it. Once you will technically search once you technically search your protocol in Web of Science, you will get to have like a tiny option here called export, and make sure you always like click have this tick on over here. And once you hit export, make sure again to export those files in EndNote or Excel or RIS. I guess I haven't listed them out here, but yeah, RIS or CSV, okay? And now, we got to a stage that we have our covenants ready, and we've discussed about all these databases searching and stuff. So once we get to Covenants, I'm just gonna like introduce what Covenants is and stuff. It's like a review management platform specifically designed to support systematic reviews, scoping reviews, and literature reviews. And it's more or less like a central workspace or like a dashboard for your review project. And Covenants will just technically start taking over after all of those previous steps that we've already done, and it will help you with your screening phase, and it will help you track reviewer decisions, and it will help you provide and produce your Prisma statistic automatically, so you don't have to go above and beyond to make that happen. This is more or less like a chart that a lot of researchable literature papers are supposed to contain it, which is basically like a flow chart of the amount of inputs of papers that you had, and how many papers you are planning to screen, and how many papers you are planning to extract, and ultimately write a paper about it, which technically looks like a flow chart. Hopefully I will show you a picture of it once we are done with our slides today. And there are a couple of steps that once you will make a new review in Covenants that you have to officially take, but they're very, very, honestly, very straightforward. I don't want to stress you over this because I already made that for you, so you don't have to think about it. All I want you to do is to accept the invitation that I sent. But if I want to go over it a little bit quick, so once you open up your Covenants account, you will get a couple of questions that will shape your, it gives a little bit of data and information about your studies to Covenants, okay? So the first question, it will ask, are you creating a Cochrane review? And I put the answer no, because Cochrane review is a type of review that technically physicians and doctors will conduct to investigate a very specific niche questions in healthcare or medicine. Okay, so this is obviously not the case that we are going for. So we can just immediately know that's no to that question. And you will get to pick a review name over here, and you will get to decide on the review type you have even. So I listed down the options that you will get once you open up Covenants. Therapy, prevention, etiology, diagnosis, qualitative, and prognosis. So it's pretty much it is pretty much self-explanatory on how you would estimate or identify what sort of question you are technically dealing with. For example, if you are trying to investigate whether depression causes more doom scrolling, that'll possibly fall down, or maybe I can iterate it a little bit better. Um, for example, we can just ask, does depression causes higher chances of ADHD in kids less than 10? That can be possibly more or less a causational question that you want to find some sort of a correlation between a certain disease and a certain outcome, which I personally feel like it can be more or less ideology. But again, we can talk about this a little bit more if you have any questions, and if you are looking to know what type of review what type of technically question types you are technically having. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And then you will get to pick your what's it called, all the way at the end of this picture. You'll get to pick a couple of other information which are pretty straightforward, and then you will create your review. Okay, this is the video that I wanted to show it to you, because I feel like it can be a good introduction on how Covidence would look like and how certain features are operated. Okay, so let's watch this together.
Hello, and thank you for joining me for the fifth and final installment in the Systematic Review video series. In this video, we will look at using the Systematic Review software Covidence, which greatly streamlines the process of performing a systematic review. There are a lot of features in Covidence, and I would be unable to give a thorough description of all of that in the brief time that I have, so I will try to cover the highlights and give you some resources to learn more. Covidence is software that is specifically designed to guide you through the steps in producing a systematic review. It facilitates the input of multiple team members while helping you to maintain appropriate records for the purpose of reporting your process when it comes time to write a paper or manuscript based on your work. First, I want to show you how to get access to Covidence using the Himmelfarb Library subscription. On this slide, you will see a URL to get to the library's Covidence guide, from which you can join our subscription. If you pause the video, you can also use the QR code on this slide to get there. Once on the page, you will see this box shown on the right side of the screen.
Just a quick note, you can just skip all these steps that the video is explaining. You can just access Covidence easy peasy through your institution email account, so that shouldn't be a problem.
To show you some of the key features of the software. The first is how to create a new project. So you'll see a button here that says Start a New Review. So I'm going to click on that, and here you would give the name for your review. And if you have created a free account, a trial account, you may see something like this, where you can either choose to use your trial account or the Himmelfarb account, assuming you've joined the Himmelfarb license. Always use the Himmelfarb license version. So now that I've created my project, let's take a look at one of those projects, and I'll show you some of the key features. So the first of those is the settings link here, so I'm going to click that, and in the settings there's a number of things I can do. One of those is to change the number of votes required at each stage in the process. As soon as you add more than one person to the project, it will default to 2, but you can change that. It's also in the settings, by clicking on reviewers, that you can invite other people to help you with your review. And so it should be noted that you can invite anyone you want to be part of this review. They don't have to be part of the GW community. You can invite them, and they will have full access to Covidence, and they'll be able to perform all the functions. So the next thing I want to show you is how to import references. So once you do your searches in PubMed and Scopus and other databases, you're going to have to get the references into Covidence so you can start voting. So to do that, I'm going to click here on Import, and here I would indicate where in the process I want it to be imported, usually to the screening process, and then I would choose the file that I want to import. Please note that Covidence only accepts files in one of these 3 formats: XML, PubMed format, or RIS. So now that I've imported my references, it's time to start voting. So the first phase of that is right here, the title and abstract screening. So I'm going to click Continue, and it'll give you a list of all of the articles that you can vote on. And so what I would do is read the title, read the abstract, apply my inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then cast a vote. So either no, I don't think it should be included, maybe it should be included, or yes, it should be included. As the voting is done, Covidence is moving the articles in real time. So once an article receives 2 votes, it gets moved. If it receives 2 no's, it goes into the irrelevant folder here. If it receives any combination of maybes and yeses, it moves on to full text review. And if it receives a split vote, maybe yes and a no, it moves on to the conflict pile. The next stage in the process is the full text review. So those articles that have received any combination of maybes and yeses during the prior step, the title abstract screening, will move here. Once they're here, I would have to look for the PDF and read the entire article, and then I would vote again based on my inclusion-exclusion criteria whether I want to include that article. For those that receive a split vote, it will become a conflict. If it receives 2 no's, it moves to excluded, and if it receives 2 includes, it moves on to extraction. And the extraction is the next step. So for those articles that made it through both screening processes, I would do a data extraction based on this data extraction template that I can create. To recap, Covidence is a software.
All right. So now that we have a thorough understanding of how would Covidence look like and what are the key features of the Covidence that we're about to use, I just want to give you another glance of each and every one of these steps with a little bit of more detail. But the video pretty much covered everything, but I just want to have a bit of a deep dive of our own, okay? So once you guys imported your references into Covidence, we move to another stage that we would call in the reviewing process called screening, which is a process that determines whether studies technically meet the eligibility criteria that you established before beginning your review. This will technically include your inclusion and exclusion criteria. One more time, I want to iterate on the fact that how important it is to have your inclusions and exclusion criteria set down already by now, but if you didn't, I want you to get that out of the way by this weekend, because it is absolutely necessary to start at least developing your inclusion and your exclusion criteria. So by the time that you will get to the screening phase, you have an understanding of the studies that you want to include and the ones that you just simply want to cross out, okay? And ultimately, the way that screening helps with our project is to directly impact the quality, the reliability, and the transparency of our finding. And simply, as you guys by now you should know, is screening is not just removing articles. In reality, as you see, it is a very structured decision-making process that helps us identify the studies that truly matches the answer of our research question with minimum amount of bias introduced to our whole process, okay? That should be everything that I wanted to mention here. So everything, we do during the screening should be guided by our inclusion and our exclusion criteria. Obviously, a personal opinion should never influence your decision once you are in your screening phase. Once we get to so the video already showed you a step-by-step of how the screening would look like. So we would start off with the title and the abstract screening, which reviewers would agree or disagree or have a mixed opinion of yeses and maybes, maybes and nos or yeses, which according to each of these stages, according to how reviewers will technically cast a vote, a certain paper will move to certain categories. So if for example, if a paper got 2 no's, it will just immediately get removed. If it casts a mix of yeses and maybes, or the no's and maybes even, it'll kind of get transferred to the full text screening. And if it obviously it's a combination of yeses or no's, it will move to the conflict stage at the same title and abstract screening phase, okay? And then the last step of what we are about to do is to do extraction, which is when the Prisma flowchart and the Prisma checklist that we've been like mentioning in our modules, it's going to come in hand. But this is not something that I'm going to put too much focus on it. All I'm trying to do is to introduce you to the covenants, but we're going to save the Prisma breakdown for next week. Okay. And as again the video said, the first stage, as we already talked about this, and this is like, you know, the repetition of everything that the video and I said over the last page. But a couple of things to keep in mind. Sometimes when you are in title and abstract screening phase, abstract in itself contain like limited amount of information. So once you are in screening phase, you don't get to have a clear decision making at first glance, and it's completely okay. That's why the conflict resolution stage and the full text screening stage is there for you. Okay, so at times screening decisions may feel a little bit uncertain, and that's completely fine. And when you are in doubt, it is generally safer to include the paper that you have in this specific stage in title and abstract screening, and it's better to move it to a full text review rather than excluding it too early on, so you wouldn't have like technically access to it at all. Okay. And again, this is another way of repetition, so I'm not just gonna like, you know, bore you with this page. This is just there for you guys, and this is like a screenshot of the Covenants website that I included, just so you guys would have like a glance of how with these yes or no's and maybes would look like. So we're just gonna skip this. And this is one of the examples that I just wanted to include, just so I would reiterate on the fact that abstract screening and title screening is not always a stage that you can make a certain clear decision. According to this paper that I put down I put down the abstract and the title over here for you. You don't have obviously access to your inclusion and your exclusion criteria, but this was one of the examples that I kind of remembered from one of the projects that I did by myself, and this was one of those situations that I ended up including this paper in the abstract screening because everything was technically matching. All the From the first glance, the title and the abstract component was matching the population, the exposure, and even the developmental outcome I was looking for. And there was, to me, at first glance, again, it was enough amount of information to kind of perceive it as like an included paper. But once I got to the full text screening, and I was like, okay, there are certain things that I feel like it is a little bit too broad, and it is not covering the certain papers, the certain aspect of the study that I want. So I ended up excluding this paper. So this is just an example to iterate on the previous point that I made. Okay. And the full text screening is again the second stage, as we know. That technically includes all the studies that were not excluded in the title and abstract screening. And at this stage, will technically reviewers evaluate the complete article to determine if it fully meets their inclusion criteria or not. And according to the votes that has been casted on the previous step, which might have been maybes or yeses or nos, this stage is technically there for us to have a thorough understanding of the paper that we want to ultimately like end up extracting information. Okay, and one of the things that usually happens with this stage is that sometimes you have to manually and go and upload the full text. I feel like this was one of the things that I kind of struggled for a bit, so I thought it is worth mentioning. So we can just simply drag and drop the PDF file directly to Covenants, and sometimes the DOI is already there in Covenants, so we can just simply click that, and if the paper is not technically accessible to the public, you can just go and download it through your institution library. Okay, and this is again another way to iterate everything that we talked about. Again, we are dealing with our inclusion or exclusion criteria in full text screening, and we have to have a thorough understanding of the criteria that we want to make a paper eligible to be included or excluded, okay? So I'm just going to leave that for you guys. Oops. And yeah, the conflict situation that we talked about over and over again usually happens when we are encountering like some sort of a problem in screening, and it's completely normal. It's part of the whole research process, especially if you are doing it in a group format, and it's completely fine. Sometimes conflicts will arise in order to make your paper and your criteria better. Sometimes some common reasons that conflicts will happen is different interpretations that team members might have from their inclusion and their exclusion criteria. As I mentioned, sometimes abstracts and titles are not like holding enough study information or enough methodologies for you to decide right away that, okay, if this paper is worth adding in or no. And again, ambiguous study population or outcome is again part of the nature of abstract, and it's completely fine. And the uncertainty that brings on, like once you are in the title abstract screening, it's completely fine. So this is again something that I want to put a little bit of extra emphasis on it, that once you kind of ran into a conflict, there's no right or wrong answer. So I always want to be very graceful and be very mindful on the comments that you will make. There is no, as I said, there is no right or wrong answer or better answer or worse answer. Ultimately, we are trying to gather up a collective understanding over the paper that we want to include, right? So this is something, one of those moral aspects that you have to always keep in mind. And again, another iteration of the independent voting and everything that we talked about. So that is pretty much it. So sorry if it felt a little bit repetitive, but I feel like you can always come back to this video if you have any questions, and we can always talk more about your research question and how it'll apply to any of these talking points that we have, okay? That's it.